So Alabama is inching closer and closer to its annual A-Day game coming up on April 13th. So just a couple of weeks away. And, as we get closer, I wanted to continue to dive into both the strengths and the weaknesses of this Alabama roster. Now, in the last video, we talked about the biggest strength on the offensive side of the football for Alabama. But what about the defense? There's a lot of positions to choose from. It's Alabama. I wouldn't exactly say that they have a major weakness as far as any particular position, but what is the biggest strength? Now, originally when I wanted to make this video, I thought I was going to be choosing the defensive line or the secondary as the strongest position, just because there's so much experience returning in the secondary. There's a lot of talent coming in this year's recruiting class to add to the depth there. When you talk about the defensive line, the fact that Raekwon Davis ended up coming back, LeBron Ray, who was in a rotational role last year, super talented guy himself. He's expected to step up into a starting role. There was a lot to like there, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it with the losses that Alabama suffered along the defensive line, whether you're talking about Quinnen Williams, who is probably going to be a top 5 pick in the upcoming NFL draft, or Isaiah Buggs. He was at one time considered a borderline first-round pick. The draft cycle has not been great to him, not for any particular reason per se, but I think that once people really dove into his tape, he's looking more and more likely like a late day 2, early day 3 kind of guy, and he should provide a lot of value at that spot. But for Alabama, he was a significant player on that side of the football, and so losing him and Quinnen Williams, it was just very tough for me to put them as the strongest unit. So who does that leave? Obviously, it's not going to be the inside linebackers. It's actually going to be the outside linebackers or your edge rushers in a 3-4 defense. And the reason that I decided to go with them is they have a great combination of guys with experience in big-time moments, along with a lot of very talented younger guys that can really add to the rotation and step up into significant roles that kind of, maybe a guy like Ayabi and Noma, a former 5-star guy, top 5 player in the class during his true freshman season, saw the field a little bit, but he's the kind of guy, now that they've kind of talked him out of entering the transfer portal, he can step up and play a major role for Alabama at that position, and we should see a significant leap from him in that regard. But let's get back to the starters, because those are the two. When you talk about experience, you have Anthony Jennings, who is probably one of the most underrated players on Alabama's team, much in the same way that Ryan Anderson was a couple of years ago, because Jennings doesn't do any one particular thing on an elite level. He does everything extremely well, and I would argue, we saw Ryan Anderson go in the second round of the Washington Redskins a couple of years ago. If Jennings would have come out this year, I could have seen him going in the same kind of range, maybe even a little bit higher, because I think he has a higher ceiling than Ryan Anderson as far as being a pass rusher goes. But he ultimately decided to come back, and that is significant for Alabama's defense. 2 years ago, a lot of people pointed to the fact that he only had 1 sack on the year and said he was not an impact pass rusher. But when you dove into the underlying stats, whether that be his QB pressures, whether that be QB hit, whether that be QB hurries or QB hits, he combined as far as total QB pressures to lead Alabama's defense despite only having 1 sack. Now this past year he started getting home a little bit more and was able to get 5.5 sacks, but like I said, in a lot of ways sacks is a very overrated number when you're trying to paint a picture of just how impactful a defender is at getting after the quarterback. And we saw that with a guy like Anthony Jennings. But let's talk about his pass breakups. He had 11 of them this past year, which led Alabama's defense. Typically, when you're talking about, leading the team in pass breakups, that's going to come from a corner or a safety who's going to be in pass coverage a lot. really with Jennings, it was just him getting in the opposing quarterback's passing lanes and getting his hands up in the air and batting down balls. And we saw that in the very first play in the national championship game, or one of the very first plays. He was able to get in Trevor Lawrence's passing lane, get his hands up in the air, and create a second and long situation. That cannot be, that is way too underrated when it comes to the average fan, the impact that that has on the success of opposing offenses. So Jennings is a guy, he's going to be back manning the jack linebacker position. He sets the edge extremely well against the run, and he provides more pass rush than a lot of people think that he does. So he's going to be back. But the main reason that I went with the edge rushers as far as the strongest position group is the guy that's going to be starting opposite him, and that is Terrell Lewis. Guys, I loved this guy. Coming out of high school, back when he was Terrell Hall still, ended up changing his last name a couple of years ago. So now he's known as Terrell Lewis, but he was my breakout player for Alabama's defense heading into last year. He could have even been my breakout player for them before the 2017 season, but we saw that he got injured that year, didn't get to see him until the college football playoff rolled around, was able to see enough during that 2-game stretch to know why a lot of people have him so highly regarded as far as being an NFL prospect, just making crucial plays and crucial moments. But at the same time, then we see him tear his ACL prior to the 2018 season. And although he kind of made a quick recovery as far as getting back on the practice field, we never saw him see any live game reps. And so I think that Alabama fans have a lot to look forward to with this guy if he's able to stay healthy. From a player comparison standpoint, I would compare him to a guy like Chandler Jones, the Arizona Cardinals' top pass rusher, and has been for the last few years. He was originally drafted by the New England Patriots in the first round during the same draft that Dante Hightower was taken in the first round as well. They had 2 first-round picks that year. It ended up being Chandler Jones and Dante Hightower. And Jones was an impact player for New England, and then they ended up, before his contract got too large, they were going to have to pay him a significant amount of money, shipped him off to the Arizona Cardinals, and he's been an impact player there as well. But I see similarities because of the length. Terrell Lewis is 6'5", 252 pounds, tree trunks for arms, or at least that's the way it seems. And they have a very well-rounded game, both players do. You talk about the fact that he's got those long arms, he's got some explosiveness off the football. He can win in a variety of ways off the edge while still making an impact against the run. I think he is the most complete edge rusher that Alabama has had during the Saban era if he can stay healthy. So that is one of the major reasons why I think that Alabama's pass rush next year is going to be dynamite if he can stay healthy. But it's not just those guys. We've talked about Anoma being a rotational guy. You talk about a guy like Chris Allen. He was more of a guy that made an impact a couple of years ago, showed some flashes when injuries really hit that position group, had some injuries of his own that prevented the development in year 2. So we're still waiting to see exactly what Alabama has in him, but all signs point to a guy that can make a sizable leap as a rotational player behind Terrell Lewis and Anthony Jennings. So you have him in the mix as well. You have a guy like Jerez Parks, who was gray-shirted despite being a top 100 player coming out of high school, decided to gray shirt, which means he essentially sat out for a year, so he didn't start his eligibility clock. And enrolled in the following class. He was supposed to be, I think, a part of the 2017 class, ended up holding out and being a part of the 2018 class, so Alabama had enough scholarships to go around and include him. And, with him being a year older, maybe some people thought that he would come in and kind of make a bigger impact than he did, but you got to understand he took a year off of football. So it was not a huge surprise, at least not to me, that he was taking some time to get his feet back under him. But I would expect, much in the same way with guys like Anoma and Allen, I would expect another guy that could have a leap as far as his development and really try to contribute to the depth of this position. And then you got the two, obviously the 2 true freshmen that haven't enrolled yet. You've got 2 guys, Kevin Harris II, and then the King. he's going to be enrolling as well. Both of those guys are top, 160, they're in that 150 range, I believe, 120 to 150 range as far as overall players in the 2019 recruiting cycle. I know that Harris was the number 5 overall weak side defensive end. King was the number 9 overall weak side defensive end. Those are guys that we won't see in or at least on campus until summer. They weren't able to graduate early. That's totally fine. It could hurt their potential as far as making an impact in year one, but it helps the depth at the position. Another guy that I haven't really touched on simply because he made a position change, and that's Cameron Latou. Coming out of high school, he was a 4-star guy, highly regarded, playing edge rusher, but he's since made the switch to tight end, kind of experimenting a little bit, and from what I've heard, he's actually done a fantastic job there. So that could actually be one of those experiments that ends up sticking, much in the same way that Trevon Diggs, when he started kind of going from receiver to getting some snaps at cornerback, he ended up turning into, he was going to be Alabama's number 1 corner last year before he got hurt. So sometimes these experiments pay off in a major way. Latou making that switch, Alabama's defense or their edge rushers could afford losing a guy like that because there's so much talent within that group. So that is, in my opinion, the top strength for this Alabama defense. In the next video, I'm going to be switching gears a little bit, heading back to the offensive side of the football and talking about what I believe is the weakest position. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate you guys hopping on here today, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.